Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the third in the LDAC trilogy, as I call it. This is the Capsule3 Pro. And the LDAC trilogy, I think, goes back to the original was the Mini Pro HS, which was a full in-ear set. Then there was Opera 03, Opera 05, which we talked about last time. And here we have Capsule3 Pro, which is so more of the hang-down style. So whereas Mini HS Pro is a traditional, almost a TWS traditional looking one, this is more of the AirPod hang down style. So you get the little lollipop stick and you get the nice tips that actually go in your ear. So you actually get a better seal than the half in ear style, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but these are very nice. I do love their black, and this is almost a rose gold colored or copper colored accent pieces. And I think all that is the theme that they've been running through some of these recent sets. I think is very, very nice. And again, we get a nice, pretty minimal case, and you get the logo in the accent color. And down here is a reset button for your pairing reset. So all that is pretty standard SoundPEATS things. As I said, this one does have LDAC, so this is super high-res wireless audio, which is what the other ones had as well. And it probably says it on the box somewhere as well. So there you go. So LDAC, for those of you who are Android users, this is the highest res wireless audio you're going to get at the moment. And you get a high-res audio wireless sticker. This one also does active noise cancellation. It's got a 12mm dynamic driver and 8 and they call it 52, but it's 52 hours after you recharge it 2 or 3 times. So that's how they calculate that one. But the runtime, I think, is about 8 hours, and we'll get to that in a second. So it's also interesting about the Capsule3 Pro is the slight modification of the SoundPEATS Classic EQ. So if you sort of look, just generally, we won't dive too deep into it, but these 2 points, so back on life, this is sort of the bass peak almost, and this is sort of a lower treble, upper mid peak. That gives you a lot of energy. It had this big V-shaped sound. This was a big bass sound, big treble sound, very energetic, very lively, very engaging. And then when we look at Capsule3 Pro, they sort of mild this out a little bit, so brought down the V just a little bit. And I was just kind of curious as to, was this going to be the new direction, a little less energetic version? I think this is actually a more mature version of the SoundPEATS Classic EQ. You still get a lot of bass, and it still carries through a lot of energy in the treble as well. But just bringing these values down just a little bit does make it a little more easygoing, a little more relaxed. Perhaps that's going to attract a couple more people to their sound style. So I don't know. I wouldn't call it better or worse than what Life did, but I would call it slightly different, and curious as to whether they were going to keep this, more milder, smoother version of EQ going forward. So we'll have to see what happens in 2023 with their other new sets. So here we go. We'll kind of jump into Capsule3 Pro. So the Pro is kind of right off the bat. We talked about these. So it does have a 12mm dynamic driver, and SoundPEATS does pretty well on their dynamic drivers. I would argue that this one is perhaps not as good as the one in Life and some other sets. So I wasn't a huge fan of this dynamic driver. It's really hard to figure out if it's the driver itself, is it the same driver they used before, or this one is just a slightly different implementation, or the shell. There's something different about it, and we'll get to that in a second. As I said, high-res wireless audio with LDAC, and this one also does have active noise cancellation and the transparency mode. So you get, all 3 of these features are sort of what you saw in the trilogy from Mini HS Pro, Opera 3 and 5, and now Capsule3 Pro. So I think that's how I would categorize these recent ones, this LDAC, and then the full-featured noise cancellation. The original set didn't have, I think, HS Pro, whichever the original one with the LDAC one didn't have the ANC. So now we're seeing sets with the full set of features. And this one does have this hang-down convenience fit, is what I would call it. I think for casual users, you just want to drop this in your ear, take a call, listen to music, watch a movie. I think this is the right form factor for that. It's super easy to get used to. You don't have to worry too much about it jamming in your ear, twisting it and locking it and make sure it's not falling out. I think this is a very convenient fit and design, and it does work well for those music calls, movies. It's just a multitasker on the fit. This one does get you 8 hours of play time, 6 with active noise cancellation, and then down to 4 if you have noise cancellation and LDAC at the same time. So the cons, I would say the fit is super convenient. I think that is perfectly true for casual users. If your primarily use is music, I would say go with something that's going to fit inside your ear a little deeper. This one, it's sort of halfway there, right? It goes in your ear enough to seal, but you sort of prevent it. This stick, the hang down stick, sort of prevents you from getting the full seal that you might get from a full in-ear model or design. So I do think this one is super easy to use and convenient. But as far as pure music, I think I do prefer the Opera style or the Mini HS Pro. If you're primarily for music, I think those do a better job of transferring the HiRes wireless audio straight into your ear canal. I think that fit actually works better than this one. And this 12mm dynamic driver, I said, the implementation isn't as crisp in the bass, which works with a looser fit. So you get a little bass leakage, and the bass actually sounds a little tighter, less prominent, is less noticeable. So kind of a side effect of a looser fit and how they did this dynamic driver. But yeah, I do think there's something is a little different with this dynamic driver than the other ones. So sound, it's got that, as I said, they brought down the V a little bit less energetic, so it's a little more safer, more balanced tuning than some of the other sets like I pointed out. But it really needs to be paired with one of their other drivers. I think it's the right tuning to be more balanced and a little less V-shaped, but I think the driver needs to be matched to it. And I think this less V is a good idea, but don't lose the treble extension and the detail and the resolution that sort of seems to be missing with this driver. So I'm not gonna harp on it again, but yeah, less V is good, but you need a driver to match with if you're going to expose the mids and let people hear without covering it up with bass and treble. Then you need a driver that can deliver that as well. So the bass, between the fit and the tuning, it's definitely on the milder side of SoundPEATS bass presentations. As I said on the graph, they rolled the bass down slightly a bit. You don't have as much of that mid bass bump as you do on other sets, so brought that down a little bit more milder. I think that is a fine move, but I think maybe the driver capability maybe influenced that tuning. Maybe this driver isn't as capable, and they brought back the level a little bit. It's definitely more restrained, and it sounds a little slightly looser than other recent sets. The mids, and for the most part, I think the mids is one of these sets where I popped it in my ear and you start listening to tracks, and it sounds the mids are a little grainy, a little harder to hear, a little less articulate. It just sounds like something is slightly off. So you turn it up and you're like, okay, well, it sounds a little bit better, but something is just a little bit off. And I think maybe it's the treble extension, maybe it's just pure resolution, maybe it's the driver that they're using. Something just a little bit off here. And I think the classic EQ gives you those clear mids because it drops off at 200. You don't get a whole lot of bass bleeding into it. This one is definitely a little bit less energetic in the upper mids than other sets. And I think that works a little better for not only music, but other tabs as well, your phones and your movies and your games. I'd call this one safe indoor music listening versus some of the other sets which are high energy, more V-shaped, more engaging than you find in the other sets. And again, I think this driver seems to be kind of a step behind the others in resolution, but for casual users, I don't think you're going to notice. I think it sounds fine. The playback is fine, but those of you who are super critical will probably look at other sets by SoundPEATS. So treble, that even responds from 2 to 8K. So that's another one of these little small details that changed in SoundPEATS Classic. So this style tuning, it tends to work pretty good for lower volumes because you're just sort of raising the level instead of dipping down. So your electric guitars, things that would become a little bit more fatiguing at higher volume, So you dip those down so they're just not as noticeable and at a level that aren't going to be fatiguing. So when you carry this straight across, you sort of works very well for lower volume because you can hear all these things without raising the volume. But if you are a higher volume listener, these are more noticeable, and some of these higher frequency instruments right there in that range are going to be a little bit more noticeable. So yeah, I think this is kind of an interesting tuning the way they did it. It's a little bit more traditional looking, but I think actually Moondrop's Chew and Zero, there's quite a few sets that actually carry this straight over like that, and they tend to have the same criticism. They work for some users. Other users are going to notice this is just a little bit brighter, a little bit more fatiguing. But yeah, just a change. I found it kind of interesting that they made that change. But beyond that, I think dropping off early will leave the air chasers, guys who love a lot about music, serious music guys who like the air in that upper treble, probably going to look at a set like Opera 03 or 05. But this tuning is really focused on that good playback of a typical user's needs. So they really do kind of focus on that bit right there, the meat of most music, movies, games, kind of takes right in there, and that's really where the focus is. So that is probably why they did that stage. Not as big as other SoundPEATS sets, but I do think casual users will be fine with it, with the space provided and the clear imaging. Again, I think this one is very much suited towards casual music listeners, guys who are going to do calls, maybe use it during the day if you're take your calls, watch a video or two, listen to music. Guys who are doing a wide range of things, I think this tuning works out better for you. You guys who are into very critical music listening, you'll probably look at some of the other SoundPEATS sets with 12mm drivers and LDAC and ANC and transparency. So there you go. That's what I got on Capsule 3 Pro. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.